Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and we've really plumbed the depths today because this is sort of the final article when it comes to Chris and, well, his, let's just call it his physical stance, his body, really, for what it's worth. And now we come into the sticky autumnal that is Chris and sex. I'm going to try and keep this as safe for work as I possibly can. So, if you are concerned that there's quite a lot of things that are being, like, censored or anything like that, believe you me, ladies and gentlemen, it's about as... It's things are going to get graphic very, very quickly. So, because I don't want people, because I don't want to, like, leave people with nightmares or anything like that, because, bear in mind, I probably know maybe more than you guys, but, well, we'll wait and see. So let's just get started. Health disclosure, yes, don't, Chris is not, and this is not a suitable diagnosis, ladies and gentlemen. Leave the diagnoses to the professionals. Anyways, Chris has a warped view of coitus, aka hanky-panky, and romps in the hay, mostly stemming from stunned sexual development, a sheltered upbringing, and the twisted, disjointed worldview he acquired as a result. He first developed an understanding of sex from watching softcore pornography on HBO at around age 16. He describes pornographic films as educational. Honestly, if they are, then what exactly has Chris learned from them? Fuck all, ironically. Now, knowledge of sex. In his mind, Chris has mastered all there is to know about sex, and now regards himself as a bit of a guru. He has said that kissing a woman is magical and delightful, sweet and melting like ice cream or chocolate. A description he stole from Sailor Moon. What a surprise. In truth, for much of the time he was presenting this advice, Chris had yet to even kiss a girl. Goodness knows if he ended up even liking it. What he knows about sex he's picked up from rudimentary high school sexual education classes or pornography. This has engendered many false beliefs in Chris, which he sticks to religiously. Readers who brave his sex chat logs, and yes, that is a thing that exists, should immediately notice what's going wrong. Chris's fantasies are merely recreations of what he's seen in pornos, rather than plausible sexual experiences. For example, he believed that Casey would become a brutal, well, this word, followed by load after load of navy to the face. I was considering for a very long time about whether I should even make any videos tonight, but then you have to read stuff like that, and, well, I'm almost already over it, but how does Chris manage to do... How does Chris imagine he's going to build up a resource of that anyway? It's not exactly Chris's life is ball-breaking or that stresses anything that... Because if Chris was legitimately stressed, then if he played his cards right, he could build up testosterone for days, and, well, yeah. Other examples of Chris's crude misconceptions about sex are abound and numerous. He mimics female porn stars' sex positions, spreads an imaginary vagina a yard across, thinks that the clitoris is located on the female body where the perineum is located on the male one, and believes that electric shocks to the vagina are pleasurable. He also seems to believe that a woman's vagina is higher up the woman's body than it actually is. This is undoubtedly due to the experience with his sex dolls. The missionary cowgirl position, mentioned in Solitude Issue 8, is a contradiction in terms. He can't even get the most basic double entendres correct, wearing a terrible Mountain Dew parody shirt. And by the way, if you want to see what this looks like, well, it's not even featured here. What was that needs to be fixed. Anyway, a parody t-shirt that's an invitation for women to try and ride his broken penis. Yeah, the shirt itself says "Mount and Do Me," and it's legitimately not. It's the sort of shirt that should not see the light of day. I don't know what sort of moron would buy that, but there you are. He thinks that his virginity is a precious and sought after treasure which women will come in droves to take. He even went so far as to use it as a bargaining chip to haggle with a prostitute. She hung up on him literally moments after this, and believes that mass debating ultimately makes him better at sex. No, honestly, I could, if anything, you know what? Arguably, masturbating is actually, it's going to make you worse than sex, because insofar as, things like stamina or anything like that is concerned, there is probably Chris's misconceived notion that it's like, it's anywhere as better as it. Well, okay, well, I'm definitely gonna have to censor this part out. With Chris's slippery grip on language, he is also noticeably confused about basic sexual terminology. For example, Chris told Ivy he had a sticky dream about her. When Ivy asked if he meant a wet dream, he replied, "No, that's when you pee yourself, silly." And yes, by the way, I know Chris was 27 years, but who uses the word silly at 27? Outside of, people who work with younger people. Who does that? While he may have the best of intentions, not really, his word choices unwittingly present him in a very bad light. He refuses to use common terms, either medical or slang, for sex organs, instead calling penises ducks and pickles, and vaginas and vulva china or tom-tom. I don't even know if that's it. I honestly don't even know if that can mean something worse, but there you are. Out of a childish aversion born of disgust. I don't exactly know why Chris think he would be disgusted by this. It's just a word. In the same way, why would Chris call a penis a duck or a pickle? Because, well, they're just words, Chris. They can't hurt you. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, in August of 2011, Chris said he is into female domination, going as far as to draw Sonichu and Rosechu performing the act in Sonichu issue 10. I promise you guys we will actually review every single issue of Sonichu, but good lord, that's still a long ways away. So if you want a book on how not to write comic books, I'll do it for you. Save you the trouble of buying Sonichu. Now, you see this here about the anatomy of the human body according to Chris. Yes, apparently the clitoris starts literally just below a woman's belly button, and apparently her vagina, it literally ends at the point where pretty much her clitoris would begin. Apparently, Chris's idea of an actual female genitals is that they are at least, it starts almost 6 centimeters up in the body, than it should do. I don't how. Considering Chris's, education, so to speak, it's kind of perplexing the fact that Chris not only did not know that, but also is still adamant that that's how they actually meant to look. Goodness knows what he must be watching to get references like that. Reproductive biology. Chris's understanding on reproductive biology had primarily come from what he had seen in porn. Books on the subject. Chris had obtained a copy of the book Ultimate Guide to Sex and Disability, which he had told Null about on the 5th of July 2021. As a result of reading this book, Chris claimed to believe that he could mentor people about dating and sex. Chris had especially shown this in conversations he had with Fiona, where he attempts to advise her on how to approach a potential lover when she goes off to college. Chris had seemed to twist or misunderstand many of the passages found in this book, taking it to be a book on how to perform sex on disabled people rather than one for disabled people. Yeah, I know, to be honest, I don't even know why a book like that would even exist. I mean, how like what is Chris gonna tell? Is the book gonna straight up say about which hole to stick it in, or I I don't get it. Anyway, speaking of things I also don't get, moral basis. And now again, this is something that pretty much is more in terms of things like sexuality and religion, but oh boy, hold on to your hats because this is like really. Bear with me for a second. Chris's stance on sexual orientations has always been iffy at best. Prior to his transition to a tomgirl, he has shown a fear of losing his straightness. This obsessive demand for people to stay straight has been one of the first noted and exploited aspects of Chris's since his discovery. Many trolls had jokingly declared that this is an indicator of him repressing his sexuality in some fashion, only for it to end up being the case in the long run. Religion. You have heard that it is said by them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. Matthew 5:27-28. Oh, and by the way, I suppose for what they're worth, we can open up this part as well. It's well, let's just take this back. Okay, so apparently this is Chris on dating education, because somebody who doesn't... Yes, we're having to go to Chris when it comes to... If I had to go to Chris towards education, I literally would have turned up one day and then never went back. Just saying. Because I don't... Honestly, when it comes to Chris trying to, like... I'll discuss this in greater detail when it comes to Chris's oration skills. But honestly, at times, I can't even pretend to hold my hand up and say I haven't heard so much drivel in such a long time. Hey, loyal readers. Sonichu and I, we wish to take a moment to discuss our sexual acts portrayed here today. As you do. Please understand that we are legally consenting adults at ages greater than 18, and when he and I are alone, we sometimes take enjoyment in warming each other up in our 69 position. Does anyone want to mention the fact, or shall I, that apparently Solitude was intended for children? At first, at any rate, but for some reason, Chris is under the impression that, well, if you try and, I don't know, talk to the audience, or try and break the fourth wall, or try to rationalize your behavior, however dubious it may seem, then there you are. Kids will be able to understand that. Honestly, if Chris had sold this with the pretense of this being available for children, well, Chris would not have seen the light of day since 2010. Yeah, just saying. While it is good for us, it may or may not be right for you or your trusted opposite gender partner. Good to know. Chris's understandings about, even sex positions must be absolutely god-awful, because listen to how this reads. While it is good for us, it may or may not be right for you or your trusted opposite gender partner. So what, those of the same sex are not to be trusted? It has sort of been quoted, or at least speculated before, that Chris wouldn't have an issue if this was, female on female 69ing position, because, well, like a lot of bigoted sexist men, just like Chris, they don't seem to have an issue when it's women or anything like that. Even though women who do this, they don't do it for the sexual gratification for those watching. Depends who it is. At the moment, I think they sort of do it because, that's what they want to do in themselves, and that's kind of how that is. I only make mention of this because, well, if they're not doing it for the wants and needs for people like Chris, then what difference does it make when, men do it as well? Honestly, this is also something we're going to have to get into when it comes to, like, Chris and his, well, intolerance towards gay people, specifically gay men. But just to let you know, I'm already over that BS anyway, because honestly, it's such a... Actually, you know what? We'll discuss it later. Moving on. We, Christian Weston Chandler, Oh right, so now Chris is referring to himself in the second person. That's quite a new one. And everyone of this hand-drawn series fully supports safe sex. Again, what difference? What relevance this plays in the 69 position? I have absolutely no idea. And the proper use of condoms during vaginal/penile intercourse. Thank you, Chris. I never would have guessed. Also, in addition, while we also fully support sexual education in every high school, Christian Western Canada also highly recommends and would gladly support dating education classes. I'll discuss that too in a separate video because there's too much to go over with already, and this is like, it's because while sex ed is great for the eventual well-earned intercourse after 3 or more dates, it is vital to learn what to do before that moment. It should be well taught how to approach and ask one's member of the opposite gender out for the very first date our generation and future generations are at. Thank you for all your support. Not very support. Well, to whatever. Moving on. I don't care. Sex was at one point viewed through Chris's eyes by the Bible, or rather by his religion, as Chris's biblical knowledge is extremely poor and mostly baseless. Chris was very strict on keeping to the word of God when male homosexuality is the topic, vehemently stating that he hates gay men, but with no hesitation views lesbian porn and approves of it masturbatorially, as though it was going out of style, and as of 2014 seemed to be adopting a more progressive view of even gay men and their rights, albeit begrudgingly. In 2015, Chris made a video lamenting his past homophobia and clarifying that he apparently now has great liking and admiration for male homosexuality. Now, one thing you may be arguing, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we get to like sort of evidence to prove that is true, why would Chris only say this now? Is it because Chris was trying to fit into the LGBTQ plus community by this point, so therefore, well, trying to actually look someone who's, well, at least look. I say look because you think Chris is only doing it because he wants to look progressive and actually quite accepting and stuff like that. You could argue this, but or is it the sort of thing Chris had to sort of like force himself to do just so he could be associated with it? You tell me. Retconning the vicious homophobic tirade of Solitude 10 into a bizarre zombie apocalypse, implying that he realizes religion is not an excuse for discrimination. Another violation of his Christian morals is the fact that he planned on losing his virginity on the 3rd or 4th date, while his true sweetheart, read first girl who will last 3 dates with Chris, that's a conundrum in itself. This is, of course, blatant violation of the Christian value of marriage before sex. The Bible also frowns upon pornographers, of which he is very guilty and holds no apparent remorse. These double-down standards cause many trolls to despise him, seeing as he selectively chooses what to denigrate and what is okay in his own personal dogma, although to be somewhat fair, he's far from the only follower of the Christian faith to do so. And before anybody asks, God wouldn't want to see any of his followers like this unhappy. But at the same time, Chris, it's only ever about what's ever going to make Chris happy. It's never about whether or not Chris can make other people happy. It's all about what Chris wants and what Chris will get, if that makes sense. There's very few things you'll come to notice, ladies and gentlemen, in Chris's story that revolves around the idea of Chris being not only incredibly selfish, but also incredibly petulant as a result of his selfishness. Despite people pointing out these contradictions, even quoting passages of the Bible, he will deny it. This is most likely because he goes to a very liberal church, so any question about premarital sex is probably interpreted quite liberally, and Chris believes that his church, and only his church, defines the entirety of religious morality. What a stand-up citizen, eh? As it applies to him, anyway. When Chris asks Rocky about passages quoted to him by trolls, she only fuels his a la carte Christianity by saying things like sex before marriage is okay as long as the couple is in love, which contradicts Christian doctrine. In summary, Chris picked and chose what parts of Christian doctrine suit his own prejudices, and disregards the ones that would interfere with his love quest. Sexism. Well, again, I know you guys can probably see this, I'm gonna have to edit this up as well, but, well, enjoy seeing Chris's disembodied head bouncing around in what looks like a fish tank that hasn't been cleaned in 14 months. Chris seems to consider a female sexual partner as a rubber stamp over his alleged sexual orientation, flying in the face of any morale system he's ever had. And that's quite a claim right there if you know anything about Chris. He announced his desire to upload on the internet a video of his first full sexual intercourse, even if his hypothetical partner refused to consent to it. What a gentleman. After further prodding, he added that he would simply hide the camera, record the event without her consent, and blur her face before making the video public. That's not even good enough either. Supposing Chris was to blur out her face, if you don't get her permission, then guess what, Chris? You could face serious jail time for stuff like that. I don't think the term is I don't think it's not necessarily revenge porn, but I suppose it would be some sort. I think in terms of the law, a lot of things that involve things that would involve like a lack of consent, sort of more fall into the realms of assault. Although I suppose maybe, but then again, again you could sort of almost view this sort of thing as like a form of assault, because it was done without consent, and even if it doesn't matter if a face is blurred out, I think that's the least of Chris's worries by this point. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure if it's necessarily classified as assault. It's deception, actually. I think that's what the phrasing would be. Though I'm sure Chris probably could get done for assault in some capacity. Anyway, sorry, where were we? In Quick's final message to the second Quick, Chris indicated that if a woman accused him of being gay in person, he would sexually assault them by demanding they submit to a kiss and allow him to videotape the act, possibly as a way of proving his straightness. Okay, so now we go straight into the realms of rape, sexual assault, and what I can only presume is revenge porn by this point. Chris, if you did that, you would be facing nearly 30 years in prison for if you did something like that. Thankfully, I can say that this never happened, but to be honest, I feel like you should be facing some sort of repercussions for even saying something like that. But sadly, such a law hasn't been pressed yet. But to be honest, if I was a woman and if I straight up heard Chris say something like that, I honestly would almost be pressing for charges, because that is shocking beyond belief. How would you? Because here, and in case you're thinking I'm being like too much of an SJW about this, what if you were a woman, guys, and you heard someone say this? What would you think? Exactly. For Chris, as stated above, a woman is just a living, sentient sex toy, existing only to validate him as a heterosexual as long as they're straight and younger than him. of course. To be honest, I think Chris is what they call the white version of D12. You know that infamous line that women ain't shit, only good for cooking clean, sucking dick, and that's it. Honestly, that's Chris's outlook, to say the least. And unlike D12, Chris is not even anywhere near as talented, or at least quite witty in his retort, but that's besides the point. Chris in the act. In what I can only describe as Chris throwing himself into the arms, well, the it doesn't have arms, but into the piss-stained PSI throes of passion, which thankfully you guys won't be able to see, but count yourselves lucky, trust me. Leaked tapes of Chris's audio sex with Julie and the infamous sex tape with Kimmy shed light on Chris as he acts out his fantasies. In particular, the sex tape shows how Chris assumes female positions, notably riding on top of Kimmy in a scene straight out of a porno. It seems that Chris's entirety of knowledge about sexual relationships stems from ignoring the men in pornography due to fear of becoming a gay man. I know that they are using a different term here, but trust me, I am not saying that word. You know what? I draw a pretty hard line when it comes to stuff like that. Anyways, however, it should be noted that in most of Chris's Rule 34 drawings, yes, that there is such a thing, the characters do tend to assume positions which are fitting for their gender. Shocking, because I thought Chris thought he was going to turn into a gay man if he did stuff like that, but apparently not. This is including Chris himself. It might be that Chris adopts female positions not so much due to ignorance regarding sex, but more because of his identification with the opposite gender. Although, really, considering in the tapes about Hey Julie and stuff like that, considering Chris didn't express any sentiment before or after, well, afterwards, I suppose, but not immediately after, we can only assume that, well, Chris just... Maybe this was the only position he felt comfortable with Julie by this point, or at least enough to prove his point, I guess. Chris's view on cunnilingus, isn't that a sentence, put on display in for jreyesonly.move, includes slobbering all over... You know what? Because I haven't upset you guys enough tonight, let's just see it anyway. And by the way, this is the infamous Mountain Doomy shirt. Have you ever seen any... I mean, Chris, this is not a good look. I'm sorry. It just isn't. Did I ever once tell you guys a story that about 3 years ago, I went into a store about like 5:30 in the afternoon, and there was a guy who also came in. He literally had a Pornhub shirt on, like black background, you know, all that. He was about 21 stone, about mid-50s, and well, he went outside wearing a shirt like that, and I'm not gonna, like, you know, play, you know, fatism or anything like that, but I would not have worn that shirt, is all I'm saying, because it's... Why? Who? What for? You know what? Let's just get to the point, I guess. Good. Now again, let's honest first of all, I actually feel a little bit sick, to be honest, actually, after watching that. Secondly, yes, there was a section in that in which Chris called Jackie Ivy, so it didn't really seem to matter who it was, well, by that point. Third, I wasn't joking about feeling sick, good lord. Fourth, I hope to God we don't ever see that again, because why would Chris, after talking to somebody he's actually never met in the real world, would then resort to just why not talk about just going on a date, or just, I don't know, talk about interest and stuff like that? Why does did Chris think that, escalating things that quickly was, well, what can I say? Chris is just that stupid and very, very easy to fool. Moving on. In the leaked media, Chris displays that he may have some issues with delayed orgasm. This can either be physiological, bent, duck, being overweight, lack of endurance, or psychological in nature, performance anxiety, high expectations, intrusive homoerotic thoughts, subconscious guilt about sex, or a combination thereof. In the 2018 All-Star video, Chris is seen tugging on his duck along to the song. He remains flaccid the entire time. His inability to get an erection is possibly a side effect of HRT. If this is true, Chris will certainly not be getting any hanky-panky in the future. During his time losing his virginity to a prostitute, it's worth noting that he first received a blowjob, then demanded cowgirl before possibly missionary later. But luckily for her, he couldn't last very long and finished just after she rode him for a bit. This is important as it points to big problems with Chris. Just two. I'm surprised we're leveling it to just two. But anyway, first is his lack of self-control due to him finishing so quickly. Second is that he ordered possibly the laziest sex position in the book, with Mia doing pretty much all of the physical exercise, with Chris being a lazy fuck. Chris's second sexual partner in his life was none other than his own mom. I'm gonna be sick. The exact details of this incestuous affair is a bit vague, and something that I have literally never... I've tried all in my power to avoid talking about until the very end, but... well, we could talk about some of it, but then again, to say every act described by Chris is extremely disturbing and not for the faint of heart. Contraceptives. Moving on. Confidently, I wear a condom during the second half when I masturbate. I use Trojan or Lifestyles brand, Trojan mostly, and I use condoms when I fooled with the LDs as well. Wait, you during the second half, Chris? How many condoms must you go? I don't. No wonder Chris is always in the red. He always burns just money whenever he can afford to do it. Condoms, or as Chris has called them, raincoats, are thin latex coverings worn over a man's penis for the purpose of birth control. However, Chris seems to have understood that condom is more of a symbol for promoting safe premarital sex, rather than as a contraceptive. Aside from promoting safe sex and justifying premarital sex, Chris has also drawn his male solitude characters with condoms in order to censor their penises. Chris has stated that before his third date with Blanca, he'd wear a condom for the first 2 times they'd had sex, only to have non-protected sex by the third date. I don't really know how Chris thinks he can enforce something like that, but okay. Showing that he also believed that condoms serve as more of a kind of gateway to pregnancy. Chris had a box of chocolate-flavoured condoms that he purchased to be prepared for his first time. Chris had given a few different dates for when they expired, sometime in 2010 and January of 2013. Thank God we stopped using them. I mean, would you suck a 15-year-old caramel? No, of course you wouldn't. Chris reportedly also wore a condom that was also flavoured like green apple while engaging in sex with Mia Hamm. It's not entirely clear whether the condom was entirely successful or not, due to him mentioning that a smidge of navy had leaked out after their first round together, meaning he either kept them in his pocket for far too long, the condom didn't fit entirely around his bent duck, he became flaccid way faster than he should have, or he's an idiot who mistook a smear of lube or vaginal discharge for semen. Knowing Chris, any of these explanations are equally possible. For those wondering, however, it's probably safe to assume Mia Hamm won't be harbouring Crystal anytime soon. Hallelujah. Even by some non-existent chance he managed to get her pregnant, she would have likely been on the pill anyway. A bit of a blasé statement, but again, because I don't have any evidence to the contrary, maybe. Chris would later reveal to Noel that he was using a condom while he was having sex with his over 50 girlfriend, who was later discovered to be Barb. While ploughing a woman like Barb would cause anyone to instinctively wear the thickest condom available, then get themselves tested a few times over just in case, all of which Chris did, realistically there wasn't much reason to do so, since the risk of STDs and pregnancies was non-existent, since both were, at least where STIs were concerned, clean and both completely infertile. Mind you, there is also, remember, the case that Chris has been subject to a few UTIs in the past, and, well, considering that's sort of a bit, it's more in the genitalial area, that's a little bit more cause for concern, I guess. Sexual frustration. Chris has had a yearning to have a girl to have sex with since the start of his love quest in 2003. The first manifestation of this was when he was clawing at Megan, where his pining for her went ignored or denied as any sane person would. Okay, so slight update I need to give you guys. It's been 10 minutes later. I kind of had to pause the video very abruptly because, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I feel like shit. I feel absolutely dreadful. But I'm not even going to pretend, ladies and gentlemen, that we're done, because there is nothing worse than feeling sick and then you have to listen to the Chris's in-outs, and then all the bullshit that just spews from this man's mouth is it's enough to make you literally not... Honestly, after reading this, I'll literally be surprised if I ever want to have anything to do with with sex literally after this, because honest to God, I just ill. Anyway, sorry. Frustration. Yes. Throughout the first half of 2021, Chris's search for a sweetheart had resumed. Chris has expressed great sexual frustration, yearning for a physical girl to have sex with over his fictitious sweethearts. According to Kyle, at some point in February of 2021, Chris expressed interest in wanting to get a hooker. Something that Chris was once not in favour of. Also, I'm pretty sure it's still illegal in the state of Virginia. And Chris, why nobody took any interest in Chris trying to boast about what was essentially breaking the law, you tell me. Chris wouldn't even, I don't think Chris could even have done something like even cross state line to do something like that. In March of 2021, following a masturbation session, Chris had a conversation with the Watchman, in which he discussed how, despite not disliking or disapproving of the act of masturbation, he felt that he was born the wrong gender. In a May 2021 conversation, he claimed that over the years he would continually consume pornography and masturbate to get the hard-on. So, he literally did it just so he could feel any sort of gratification whatsoever, huh? Even when, biologically, his body was telling him, no, that's it, buddy, we're shut up for today. He expressed how, until recently, he felt that he had not fully explored his sexuality, nor any other means to stimulate himself, and even then claims to still overthink the process of inserting a dildo or vibrator up his ass. As you do. I know it's been mentioned before, but I'm just going to mention again in passing. Why does everybody know everything about you, Chris? Because you tell them. That's why. Means of coping with sexual frustration. Masturbation and porn consumption. Chris has had a history of masturbating, starting when he discovered he could stimulate his penis by rubbing it against a washcloth when he was 15 Why that's something that... Why on earth people needed to know that? I don't get it. In 2009, he made use of a wash basin in the kitchen of his house while performing the act, and had claimed in the Ivy Q&A that he made use of a pillow that he'd folded in half, treated it as a masturbation tool. Honestly, I'm going to be sick again. Since then, masturbation has been an outlet for Chris's sexual frustration. In a February 2021 conversation with the Watchman, Chris said, masturbation takes 15 long, tiring, and annoying minutes. With my body, regardless of whatever method or tool utilized, and it has literally been that long in unenjoyable time since I first rubbed one out while my body was 15. That's a weird phrasing. And that was long before I ever started on HRT in 2016. So not only is masturbation out of the question, it's more misery-inducing. Drawing porn. Okay, here we go. As for the drawing itself, I realized that it was done not only out of inspired fantasy, angst against ED, and love for you, but also a major release for my crazy mixed up hormones. If I didn't have the foresight to put my pent-up frustrations and feelings in the form of something, I might have become an abusive maniac. So thank God for allowing me to release my bottled up frustrations in a more positive, yet not so politically correct, and not physically hurting others method. If you don't know what this is about, ladies and gentlemen, this is Chris trying to justify and rectify Megan about the SheCameForQuick.jpg drawing. You don't know what that's about, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it's probably best you don't. Honestly, I even when people ask me who even is this Chris Chan lark, I try to literally keep it so we don't have to talk about stuff like this. Yeah. Chris has on more than one occasion drawn pornography of his own in order to release sexual tension. Chris claimed to Megan Schroeder that he had, in part, created the controversial drawing She Came for Quick.jpg because he felt that doing so would inhibit him from sexually advancing on Megan, as he had feelings for her, and would have become an abusive maniac had he not created the drawing. The fact that Chris had decided to use what was essentially a product of his own pent-up sexual frustration as a means of attempting to get his Encyclopedia Dramatica page down only seemed to leave a much more bitter taste in Megan's mouth after announcing this. During this period, when Chris became much more sexually frustrated in 2021, he displayed this more openly towards friends, and even on his social media. He sent a picture of his Christian solitary persona wearing a negligee while giving a seductive look to the WCT, and talked to him about how arousing it is to wear one. Okay. It's not known whether or not the WCT had anything to say to this. Sex toys. Chris has made innumerable purchases for sex toys, porn DVDs, and inflatable sex dolls. We might do just a short video on that later, but, well, your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen. Enough said. Relationships with OCs. For a time, partly due to influence from the Idea guys, Chris has temporarily given up on his search for a sweetheart in pursuit of being in relationships with fictional characters instead. Same problem, really. Wet dreams. Chris has also had his share of his wet dreams, particularly whenever he had held strong feelings for his flavour of the week. The first of these wet dreams was, of course, Panda Halo, where he dreamed about the both of them getting naked, having sex, and then Chris finally climaxing. Chris also had a dream where he was in a labyrinth filled with water, where he met a woman and had sex with her. Chris recreated this dream in a Flipnote animation on Flipnote Hatina. The strangest of these was one where Chris claims that he almost had sex with the Sonic character Sally Acorn, which had left him sexually frustrated afterwards. Mind you, Sally is... Why Sally literally only walks around in literally just like a vest, and they don't even design any pants for her in the whole of Sonic the Hedgehog, so what's up with that? Then again, none of the isn't it all... Again, think about it this way. All the male characters in the Sonic franchise don't wear clothes except for shoes. All the female characters in the franchise, from like Rouge, Amy, Sally... Cream, I guess, all of them, have to wear dresses and stuff like that. Well, for good reasons and stuff like that. Actually, speaking of I know there's an idea that they wanted to make Sonic the Hedgehog 4 like a romantic comedy, because apparently that's when they're going to like introduce Amy Rose, but do you think they'll introduce cream and cheese into that as well? Or maybe Rouge, or... I don't know. I haven't even seen any of the movies anyway, but that's just something to put out there, I guess. Which had left... Anyway, Chris talks about another wet dream he had 2 months later, this time of the Sonic X character Chris Thorndike, aged up and handsome. Chris also expresses the sexual frustration he felt after waking up from this dream too. Okay. Sex with mother. It had been joked and speculated by trolls, Christorians, and observers alike that Chris has much more intimate feelings with his mother than he initially let on. These speculations were confirmed in July of 2021, when screenshots were leaked of Chris detailing to Isabella Loretta Janke of his incestuous exploits. No later revealed worrying conversations he had previously with Chris about a new over-50s girlfriend he had been using condoms with. We will leave up to you to put 2 and 2 together. We'll cover this story in greater detail much later down the year, but there you are. Sexual deviancy. Chris's skewed basis of his understanding of sex leads to him exhibiting several instances of sexual deviancy. Inappropriate interactions with women. To say the least, Chris's social interactions hinder his ability to understand sexual etiquette. Well, we'll just call this age disparity. This has always been a very touchy subject when it comes to Chris. Chris had at first attempted to deny all claims that he had disagreements with the age of consent, even creating a new word, pedophork, as a sort of comeback to those who refer to him as such. Apparently being created solely to make the word rhyme in "I'm not a pedophork, you dorks," Chris has tried to retain this image by removing any references that he may be interpreted as him of being a pedophork in his Solitude comics. Most infamously, Chris had characters in Solitude issue 8 make comments about dumb laws when Zapina Rosechew, who is 14 years old, asked to participate in stripping for women's rights. And bear in mind, Chris can't even fall back on the excuse that what the Japanese do is that they say that because their characters are not real, they are nothing more than glorified, ink on a parchment. Then, because they're not real, then how can you say such and such is this, that, and the other if they're not real? But again, this is the sort of thing that would, if Chris was in Japan and did this, then you know what, it still would be really creepy, and it would be the sort of thing that, well, maybe the authorities would probably deport Chris back to Japan, because whilst this is the sort of thing that probably is more specific towards Japanese citizens, it's not particularly the case when it comes to, well, foreigners coming to Japan to do it. Just saying. At a glance, Chris seems to adhere to the age of consent, once advertising on his attraction signs that he would only date someone of legal age. Chris, however, does not seem to understand or care about how creepy it is for him to be attracted to women that are half his age, and seems to see it as if yet another barrier for his love quest. Chris has catcalled an artist whom we believe to be entering young adulthood. Okay. Well, who is this? Grace Vandervoort or someone like that? Because, honest to God, like, I know there are quite, like, some similarities between, like, Chris and Daniel Larson, but Daniel Larson rides the line of being completely insane. Not quite in the same, not necessarily in the same sort of camp as Chris, but both are pretty mad. Has made sexual remarks towards Bella, despite her having no interest in Chris whatsoever, and has shown arousal when Fiona exposed herself to him. Necrophilia. Oh God, yeah. Any chance of this? Literally, that it's probably gone out the window. But there we are. While Chris himself has never engaged in sex with a dead body. What are these sentences I'm reading tonight? Jesus Christ. To the best of anyone's knowledge. Oh, thank you for saying that. Chris has recently been referring to Barb as a zombie-like husk since even before they began engaging in their affair, and that her soul has already moved on to her Rosechew form in C-197. So I guess we could say Chris is an animal fucker as well then, or if he thinks of her like that. Complaining that her lifeless body was still clinging to life and preventing him from going back home. Meaning that Chris is at least partially comfortable with the idea of having sex with his dead mother. In another disturbing incident, Chris recorded "It's Not That Cold" when he proceeds to imitate Buffalo Bill and pretends to get inside his dead dog Paddy. Nobody really knows why he did this, and the explanation, even to this day, is not particularly certain. While not engaging in sex with her, he does take a bizarre sexual pleasure in wearing her corpse, or at least pretending to do so, since he was too lazy to actually dig her up. Probably for the best. Bestiality. I can imagine myself doing it with a collie at least, like Lassie. Guys, honestly, you know what? After reading that, and as somebody who owns 2 collies myself, I literally, I don't even want to continue doing this article. I really, really don't. Ow. Oh, oh. Sorry about this, guys. Just give me like about 10 seconds so I can actually, regain my composure a little. Right, okay. 10 seconds. I'm up. Right, okay. In December of 2008, Chris told Panda Halo he would be willing to have sex with a female dog for her. However, in his interview with Screw Attack Europe, Chris says he's against beastiality. These were trolls, weren't they? But we'll get into that maybe some other time, because if somebody straight up ever asked me that, I would just hang up the call or just don't even correspond to that, because who asks something like that? Then hoists himself by his own petard by claiming that Sonichu & Co. are not half humans but all animals with human form. So technically this isn't bestiality, as they're animals having sex with each other. Chris suggested that Brian from Family Guy be paired up by any sex breed of dog. In the Red Maned Deer, Chris recites a poem he wrote about having sex with a deer, but at the end of it states this was in fact not an act of bestiality, for you see, the red-maned deer I have been communicating with and tracking is really you, my womanly sweetheart named Jackie Romy. I'll have to go over this in more detail when it comes to Chris and his poetry, because sweet, merciful Christ, Chris's attempts at poetry is agonizing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The fact that the deer is Jackie is obvious, but in spite of this, he explicitly stated that it was her at the end anyway. In a photo of the rental house from June 2014, the Chandler minivan bears a bumper sticker reading, "I sleep with dogs." What exactly this means is yet to be determined. In fact, I don't even want to look into it, because we'd be here all night. Moving on. Is Chris a furry? I am half Sonichu and half Pokemon, thus making me a furry. This should be noted, Chris May 2018, during the aftermath of the Idea Guy saga. So these were things that wormed their way into Chris's fourth center of mind, I suppose. Whether Chris could actually be considered a furry was debated for a long time. There are some things that point in this direction, however. Chris certainly gets aroused by provocative drawings of anthropomorphic animals, at least when they are Sonic characters, and he has drawn unsolicited pornography of his own Sonic recolors. Chris Chan's Sonichu is in many ways similar to a fursona, and Chris even roleplayed the character while cybering with Julie. Finally, in the Giant Penis comic, Chris and Ivy both transform into anthropomorphic animals during the act of sex. On the other hand, Mims and Lucas noted that Chris was projected against a male furry who patronized the gameplays because he happened to be gay. Given the high proportion of gay and bisexual men in the furry fandom, classic Chris would almost certainly have been uncomfortable at any kind of furry gathering. In May of 2018, under the influence of the Idea Guys, Chris declared himself a furry. The Idea Guys also brainwashed him into believing he is in a polyamorous marriage with his anthropomorphic imaginary friends Magi-chan Sonichu and Grizel Rosechew, and Chris believes he has had sexual relations with these imaginary friends. Right, okay. Also of note is that in mid-2020, he binge-watched the Netflix anime BNA, Brand New Animal, commenting that it was very good, but said nothing further than that. While Chris may loosely qualify as a furry due to his obsession with anthropomorphic electric hedgehog Pokemon and ponies, he has never shown an interest in the broader furry community. In fact, speaking of ponies, I remember like a number of years ago, ladies and gentlemen, there was a place I worked in which we had a customer who would come in like every month or so. I think he was called like Mr. Rostenwise. Except here's the thing you need to know about Mr. Rostenwise. First of all, that was not his real name, because apparently for legal reasons he had to actually have it changed. So goodness knows what his name actually was. He was about like late 50s. He wore like a huge, those stupid, hideous green coats that I see like women wear, the ones that almost go entirely down to the ground. And even the way he was like, he looked like banana shaped, despite the way his gut like stuck out. But he still walked around like I said, banana shaped, because apparently this was a guy who apparently had been banned from every single stable in the country, because apparently he was interfering with horses. I that's what I got told, and I shit you not, ladies and gentlemen. Those poor fucking horses. I swear to God. And maybe that's why he looks like that, perhaps. Maybe he was kicked in the gut by a horse. Good. Because that's what they deserve. That's what people like that deserve. It's a shame his skull wasn't cracked in, but that's besides the point. Moving on. I'm only saying that because that actually has kind of made me feel a little bit better, but there you are. Oedipus complex. In simple terms, it is the attachment of the child to the parent of the opposite sex, accompanied by envious and aggressive feelings toward the parent of the same sex. Surprisingly, ladies and gentlemen, when I was like studying the Gothic as for my final year in high school, when I was like 17 going on 18, I remember one of my English teachers was very, very keen to like really like make us understand that Oedipus complex is just a tried and tested formula of the macabre, and that we shouldn't be surprised when these things sort of come about. Yeah, she was quite weird, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it wasn't even relevant to anything we'd actually were studying anyway. I studied Frankenstein when I was 17. I studied Angela Carter, and yes, Angela Carter is a very, very weird woman, but she doesn't go for things like Oedipus complex. At best, her works can be described as, well, fucked. Basically, they're extremely fucked up, to say the least. And I even did Marlowe, and Marlowe I don't think you could have gotten Christopher Marlowe to write anything like that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Moving on. Chris has exuded such an Oedipus complex for years, given his feelings for his mother, coddling him while also showing resentment for Barb now and then, especially whenever he'd scold Chris for his antics. Which we'll get into those sooner or later. Prostitution. Given how badly Chris wanted to lose his virginity, at the expense of his own dignity, may I add, and everything else aside, many observers have wondered why he didn't immediately spend some of his tugboat on a prostitute. Mumble Chat number 4 from February of 2009 answered that question for a while. There, Chris explained that paying for sex would render the act meaningless, and he was, in a rare display of common sense, afraid of contracting a sexually transmitted disease. Well, you would if you didn't, stick something on the end of it, or you didn't take, like an aspirin immediately afterwards just to prevent your dick from falling off. But I don't really feel as if like common sense is Chris's forte. Needs must as the devil drives, though. While being blackmailed by Jack Thaddeus in the summer of 2009, Chris attempted to solicit the services of a Craigslist prostitute to fuck on camera so he could recover his hacked PlayStation Network accounts. So after describing his personal problems to the prostitute, who probably must have been having a very trying time already before Chris called or something, she hung up on him. Yep. Chris was apparently trying to get free sex from the hooker with long, rambling stories about his horrible life to try and gain sympathy. You know what? There are moments in which I will say Chris, even in the worst of circumstances, does still come across as rather pathetic, and well, that's just no exception. He was genuinely shocked when she didn't offer to fuck him out of pity, unaware that prostitutes, by definition, only have sex with men for money. Previously, in March of 2009, Brian Bash had sent a trio of prostitutes to Chris's house, so he would no longer be a virgin with rage. Hilarity ensued. By the beginning of 2010, Chris's views on prostitution had further softened. According to his conversations with Vivian G, around the turn of the year, he was attempting to save $100 out of his monthly budget to buy himself a whore for his 28th birthday. This presumably was the $100 for a damn hooker he referred to when begging the wallflower for sex on YouTube in March of 2010. Between April and July of 2010, under the name of Carlos Chantor, Chris tried to offer himself up as a male escort. He described himself as experienced for her pleasure with an average body type. It didn't work. Later, under the guise of his troll persona Jenkins Jinkies, Chris attempted to acquire the contact details of the hookers Brian Bash had previously hired. While it is possible that Chris merely wished to make his disguise more convincing by implying that 14-year-old Jenkins wished to hire prostitutes, it seems far more likely that Chris actually was considering hiring Brian's girls. In April of 2012, a Facebook status leaked in which Chris announced that he was no longer a virgin. Suspicion arose that this was due to the help of a hooker. Chris provided further evidence suggesting that the girl was a prostitute. On the 1st of May, when he wrote in a Facebook note that his virgin breaker can be found somewhere on the back page, a website known for featuring sex service ads. On the 28th to 29th of June 2014, Chris openly admitted that this was the first time was with a prostitute, and that he had sex with her twice. In June of 2016, Chris himself made another attempt to enter the prostitution business, now as a trans woman, going by the name Stephanie Buscakes. Predictably, Chris was unable to find any woman of any orientation who were interested in paying him $100 to either have sex with, one way, or the lesbian way. And the Stephanie Buscakes persona was not yet reappeared. Oh, and by the way, if you want to know, do you think it'll be worth trying to, I suppose, because, I'm sick of, feeling that bad, feeling that sick inside. You know what, we'll just straight up, where is it, oh, okay, here it is. So, again, can I just state for the record, where is it? Where's the video gone? Oh, here it is. So, once again, although it must be also argued, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm just going to say this just before we get started, is that, well, the rationale for this video's existence and whatever logic went into it is still to this day uncertain. How could I not even get... Yeah, okay, okay, so how am I meant to, even, yeah, let me just, okay, so that doesn't work, let's just watch it like this for what it's worth. good news, ladies and gentlemen, because one, I don't feel sick anymore, but at the same time, I just feel kind of dead inside right now after seeing that. Yeah, honestly, I was not joking about feeling dead inside. You know how I've quoted before by saying that this, of course, wouldn't work because, at least according to what I think, at any rate, proud and lazy people like Chris do not make good prostitutes. But I'll go one further. Chris, you're shooting way above your station. Because here's the thing, Chris. We already know what you are, Chris. We already know what you're like. We already know your bad habits. And, well, supposing... Ah, Jesus Christ almighty. Good Lord, please give me strength, please. That's just the thing as well, you know what? Who the fuck would actually want to even, well, who would even want to go with a maniac like Chris anyway? I mean, call it what you will, but I know exactly what Chris is. I know exactly what he's done, and I also know the things that he was apparently wanting to do anyway, so no, I don't feel bad. Learning not to feel bad, ladies and gentlemen, and feeling actually brave to call Chris out on his bullshit sexual delinquencies is actually one of those stages, ladies and gentlemen, you have to reach so that you can still consider yourself kind of sane for knowing the difference. Moving on. On the 24th of April 2018, while under influence of the idea guys who had allegedly been extorting him out of thousands of dollars, Chris announced, "Anyone living locally to me in Virginia or visiting in Charlottesville, I give your BJs for money too. Serious." A fan on Twitter messaged him about it in their conversation. Chris said, "Consider me a beginner with experience blowing my loving boyfriend. Willing to learn and adapt further. $50 for that BJ from this celeb. If he wants butt sex, that will be $100 cash only." Chris told Quick Protect Squad member Tings that he was indeed serious about prostituting himself, had several offers, but had not taken on any customers. When asked if he would consider, Chris responded, "A little from column A and the latter from column B. No, I don't know what the hell that means, and I know it's meant to be a reference from South Park, but what relevance does it make to the conversation, Chris?" Let's assume I didn't know what that was from. Can you say it without having to reference a TV show for like one time in your life? After the guard dogs rescued Chris from the idea guys' influence, he reversed course and disavowed the prostitution messages on the 7th of May 2018, saying that he had been coerced. He went further on the 25th of May, saying that he had been forced to write such things, and implied the idea guys had been behind it. According to Kyle, in February of 2021, Chris wanted a hooker and asked Kyle to ask no to get him one. Why Chris couldn't have just gone to know himself, or Chris organised it himself, I honestly don't know. Maybe it is because the state of Virginia and all that. Incest. You know, maybe I'm going to have to like separate all of these things into separate columns because, well, look how many they are. Anyway, Chris has long been suspected of having unnatural feelings about sex and family. In 2007, Chris attempted to shock Encyclopedia Dramatica into submission by posting his own Rule 34 drawings, including one of himself finger-banning a nude brunette woman. ED users immediately concluded this was Crystal, Chris's imaginary twin sister in the comics. This charge infuriated Chris and therefore became the conventional wisdom. By the time Chris successfully convinced anyone that it really was Megan Schroeder in the drawing, the notion that Chris wants to bang his imaginary twin sister had already stuck. And speaking of sticking, this is the image of, well, Chris forcing Solid Shoe on all fours, and, well, the caption, "This hurts me worse, my son, but Destiny called us to make this baby our next CPU, our crystal rose chew. Ah." And of course, Chris is wearing the Love is Love shirt, and Solid Shoe doesn't look as if, like, he understands what's going on. Crystal, Chris's imaginary twin sister, appeared as a girlfriend card he made for Yu-Gi-Oh!, and her attractiveness and desirability are brought up several times in the Solid Shoe comics, well after being established as Chris's twin. Chris has shown complete ignorance in matters incestuous before. His electric hedgehog Pokemon are all related, despite their type and appearance differences. They all come from Sonic and the same male Pikachu. Apart from that fact, they were all created by Chris and acknowledge him as such, Solid Shoe and Rose Chew calling him father. But many of them are paired off with one another, notably Solid Shoe / Rose Chew, Bubbles / Blake, and Magi / Sylvana. Simonla was technically also made by somebody else, banging and some even having kids. Chris's own comic children are a form of incest, as Chris impregnated himself with his navy. As you do, Chris shrugs off all medical / science facts and lists the two as perfectly healthy and autism-free. Right, okay. Chris has first expounded his views on incest to the internet on the 31st of January 2009. In terms of timeline, ladies and gentlemen, I literally just turned 11 years old, so happy birthday to me, I guess. During the first Mumble chat, when it was revealed that he did not fully understood the meaning of the word incest, while he showed aversion toward incest in the chat, his condemnation of it was lukewarm, saying that he would only definitely discourage that, and that lesbian incest is possibly okay due to no reproduction being involved. Compare this to his statements about male homosexuality from the same chat. "I hate gay males. I'd sooner have a sex change before I would ever turn into a gay man," or to his statements about male homosexuality from earlier that month, saying that he would make it a crime and force its practitioners into having sex with members of the opposite gender. Now that's fucked up. A year later, Chris's views became staunch when a correspondent in the mailbag pointed out that Chris's state allows cousin marriage but not same-sex marriage. Chris furiously denied it and wrote, "Cousin marriage is just as terrible and unholy as marrying your own mother or father." When another correspondent responded to Chris by saying that he is happily married to his cousin and that their marriage is indeed legal in Virginia, Chris answered him by saying that he was destined to hell for his relationship, not realizing that incest is shown in a positive light in the Bible. When the subject came up again in the next mailbag, Chris said that sexual relations between cousins are just as wrong as incest between parents and their children or between siblings, and that all those relationships were condemned in the same part of the Bible. Which is not actually true, because Chris does not know what he's talking about. Incest fix. In February of 2010, Chris notably did not react to an extremely NSFW ad of himself on the Wikipedia, depicting himself fingering Barb like he did with a former friend in a certain illustration. Despite reacting to an ad claiming that he was dead, during the Idea Guy saga, the troll convinced Chris that Magi-chan foretold of a prophecy in which Crystal would be born by Chris mating with Sonichu. He also informed Chris that if this was drawn, he wouldn't have to do it in real life. Seems like a good deal if you ask me. Chris complied. During the nonsensical issue 13 of Sonichu, incest is unsurprisingly everywhere. From Chris Chan Sonichu getting married to Magi-chan, to Chris and Sonichu forcing themselves upon each other. To the Watchmen, Chris chatted about how he was upset over implications of incest in the Sonichu family, stating that he had written a piece to dispute the incest bullshit. In a Facebook post from January 2020, Chris reiterated his opposition to incest, writing, "I personally seriously disapprove of incest, and would never practice it at all. And the bottom line is, incest is never wincest. Epic ugh." Like everything Chris says, he only says it to save face and doesn't actually believe it, and instead will do the exact opposite. Dreams of sex with Barb. On the 10th of August 2016, Chris posted a response to a mother-son couple who were arrested for incest. He admitted to having dreams of having sex with my mother, but never acting on them ever. Among other things, he also implied that incest offers a chance for better teaching the child how to better satisfy their eventual partners. I know, guys, I can't believe that's a thing that somebody actually said. All of this is in stark contrast to his earlier condemnation of incest, which raises the question of whether Chris was being true and honest, but changed his opinion later thanks to his growing degeneracy, or the likelier possibility that it was all for show. I have a few things to say in response to this article. Firstly, the child was over 18, and surely the mother has talked it out with him beforehand. What if they didn't? The child might have had social problems. What if he was just a degenerate? Or a situation where socializing or going out to socialize with other people was a greater difficulty. What if this kid, like I said, was a degenerate and was a weirdo and nobody wanted to be associated with a weirdo? Financial situation to prevent paying someone else to come over and help out in the situation. What do you mean help out in the situation? You mean hiring a prostitute or using another member of the family to... It's the sort of thing that makes me want to smack Chris, I swear to God. Moreover, it was the lifelong affections being parent and child. Also, the mother probably could not bear any ovum for children anymore. like that should make any difference whatsoever. Why does these sorts of things need to happen? Anyhow, who among everyone in this world has not had a dream of having sex with at least one of their parents? I haven't. Probably you guys at home haven't. In fact, nobody that I've ever known has ever wanted to do that. So that's bullshit, Chris. Never acting on them ever, I myself did have dreams of having sex with my mother. Although incest is quite a controversial topic. You don't say. But there are circumstances when there would be not so much harm as one may think, feel or believe. The child is over 18. The mother is unable to have any more children at the time. Birth control and protection is available and can be used. In a case of father/daughter, birth control definitely should be used anyhow. Oh, I see. So you're a sexist little piece of shit too, saying that birth control should be used in this instance, but not between mother and son. Also, consider if the child is adopted. Not as much biological. Plus, this offers a chance for better teaching the child how to better satisfy their eventual partners. How, Chris? How is that going to happen? The schools can only teach from books, not so much practice. And nobody wants to end up being a 20 or 30 plus year old virgin. By the way, I know I've made mention of things like this before, but Chris will only ever talk about stuff like this if it means he can interject by talking about himself, because that's all that matters in stuff like this. I know, that is a huge enduring pain, unless the sex act was abusive, hurtful, or would result in an unwanted birth of a physical or mentally challenged child. I would not judge or persecute the parent and child. I would encourage the child to socialize more, maybe make it easier for the child to meet up with more people his or her age. Do not send the mother and son to jail. Later, Kim Wilson would leave a comment telling Chris that incest was not harmless that Chris seemed to suggest, and that incest can result in serious mental afflictions and pains and stuff like that, and advised Chris from acting on incest. Meanwhile, on the 13th of September 2019, while role-playing as Magi-chan, Chris would describe Barb as a guilty pleasure waifu. And it begins the actual sex with Barb. While the prospect of Chris having sex with Barb was joked about for many years, most people did not believe Chris would actually go through with it. Before the incest call was leaked, there were numerous warning signs of what he was to come. Mainly being the fact that Barb would force Chris to spoon her in bed for many years, and telling Mia Hamm that the sexual massage he gave her was the same that he gave his mother. Their actions around each other have indicated a history of incestuous interest. However, many just assume that this was just a combination of Chris's autism, making him act inappropriately, and Barb's infamously controlling behavior. After the incest calls were leaked, it was revealed that Chris had been engaging in regular sex with Barb every 3 nights or so since the 27th of June 2021. His seduction methods included giving her full-body massages while making attempts to finger her, kissing her on the lips, with Barb refusing to open her mouth, and Chris making psychic connections with her before, during, and after their romps in the hay. It's also noteworthy that Chris refers to Barb as Barbie-chan almost exclusively now. Whether this has something to do with her or with her supposed anime fanfiction characteristics, a bizarre pet name, or Chris trying to subconsciously distance himself from their familial bonds is unknown. Rap. Chris was very apathetic about the idea of consent, as we've already proven, and to a larger extent the act of rap. When Panda Halo told him she was rapped by Clyde Cash, he reacted nonchalantly. He even thought it would be appropriate for Panda to move in with her rapist, which is technically in line with certain archaic Christian principles. But then again, those people can kiss my ass if you think that's if people are going to condone that sort of behavior, including Chris, whom he called a good man for regretting the rap and being willing to take care of the ensuing child. Later on, long after the Panda Halo saga was over, he would wish her and her rapist a happy marriage. In iPods Down and Listen Up, he didn't seem to realize that his improvised lyrics detailed a sexual act that would almost certainly be construed by others as rap. Chris eventually compared his ordeals with the trolls, particularly during the classic era, to rap in his Facebook posts, since Blue Spike's most infamous incident involved an act that could be described as sexual abuse in front of several people. This is admittedly a fitting description. As far as Chris being a potential rapist is concerned, however, the situation was far more complicated. For starters, as explained earlier, he admitted that he drew She Came for Quick.jpg to prevent himself from acting on his sexual impulses against Megan Schroeder, who had previously scolded him for inappropriately touching her. During a particularly disturbing chat, he, incognito, suggested that the trolls try to convince him to rap Rocky Shoemaker. He also evidently saw no issue with rap by fraud, essentially having sex with someone while tricking them into believing you're somebody else, meaning they didn't consent with you. As seen with his comic book counterpart, when he travels forwards in time to have sex with his future wife Lovely Weather in the guise of being his future self, whom is definitely a different person in the future. Didn't think about it like that. During the Casey calls, he attempted unsuccessfully to lure her to his place in the guise of being Liquid Chris. Again, seeing absolutely nothing wrong with this whatsoever. In all likelihood, though, these parts of his behaviour are most likely explained by the keys to understanding his behaviour overall. His ignorance about the world and his persecution complex causes him to be quite naive about how bad rap actually is. With the Rocky Shoemaker situation above, he likely said that as part of an odd roundabout scheme to get the trolls arrested. But it's still pretty fucked up when he'd even suggest something like this, let alone tell her about it afterwards. In one of the Casey calls, Chris states he believes that abortion in cases of rap should be the choice of the victim and that they should not be pressured by others in their decision. Despite joking about how uncomfortably close he was to his own mother, few actually believe that Chris had it in him to commit an act of rap. For instance, he tried to kiss Emily and gave up when she said no, showing that he does understand the importance of consent, or at least he used to. Unfortunately, it seems that as of 2014, he has decided that he won't take no for an answer, and basically molested Catherine during their second outing by hugging her and burying his head in her breasts even after she flatly told him not to. This gets even more disturbing when you consider this email where Chris outright says that he's entitled to a relationship. Also not helping matters was Chris kissing multiple guests who posed with him at the Too Many Games convention, regardless of consent, which of course ultimately got him kicked out. Furthermore, it was argued that Chris didn't have a history of violence conductive to attempting sexual assault. Aside from his habit of dishing out threats he can't possibly carry out, hitting Michael Snyder with a car, and macing a manager in the chest, Chris is physically very weak and unfit, and simply could not overpower an able-bodied person. The only outcome of him attempting it would be a swift knee to the dick, followed by a rousing round of America's favourite game, Kick the Autism. However, given Catherine's experience with Chris during their outing, in her words, she was taken by surprise and couldn't react to it. It was encouraged that women should exercise caution around him. Interestingly, Chris details in an announcement is that he wants all men to stay at arm's length distance away from him, along with showing the insecurities he possesses concerning men. Chris seems to think that he is an attractive enough trans woman for a man to consider rapping him. Now, I must be completely frank, ladies and gentlemen, when I say, well, there we are. That's it. We are at the end of Chris and his body. And I must also emphasize, oh my god. I had to take a break halfway through this because honestly I was like sick. And that's the operative way I can only really describe this whole article is sick. Chris's actions are sick. It's just when you look even further into this and you consider like I suppose like actually you know what, let's just keep this brief and just keep it to an end, is that if it wasn't for the fact that for some strange reason it's all about self-interest, because we know Chris has no real respect for women, unless of course Chris will have respect for women if it means that they will give him what he wants with no questions asked. But Chris will get extremely angry when, you know, women actually put up some sort of resistance to his otherwise twisted charms, I suppose, is the way I'm going to use it. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this is probably also the very first time I've actually ever had to touch upon, well, Chris's affair, shall we say, with Barb. And, well, I've waited nearly 4 years to actually finally start talking about it. But there you are. That's like the first real insight to it all, and presumably everything that happens afterwards. But with all that being said and done, I'm going to bed, and I'm probably going to sleep like the dead, because honest to God, I feel dead inside. So there we go, and I'll see all of you guys again in the next article. So take care, and bye-bye for now. Keep safe, my friends. Keep safe.